Planning committee meeting started. And housing task force. Call to order. Doug McCracken. Here. Paul McKay.
Here.
Kathy Sugland.
Here.
Jay Byers. Here. Dennis Tulamari. Here. And we'll see Jay Byers for Michael Bender. We have minutes?
We do have minutes, yes.
Okay.
I sent them along.
Yeah, I didn't bring a copy.
I didn't. Upstairs or?
We can just continue it to the next
You can
meeting.
continue to the next meeting. Thank you. Any correspondence?
No,
Survey question review continued. So we have drafted the survey questions. Paul, Bob, and Doug have chimed in. I have reviewed their comments along with the final version. I'm gonna have some comments, but I'll open it up to the floor.
Do you want to go question by question and just make sure everybody's on the same page? I know everybody has comments.
You will probably get there, but I think there's some general questions and comments about what our goal is.
Yeah, I could start. So I'm having agita with the survey. This has been a learning experience for me, over a period of years, what is affordable housing? I understand it. The income levels, I understand the need, I understand the conflicts with density and septic. Recently in Old Lyme, they had a town meeting on the zoning overlay for increasing the density, and they had a standing room only, they had to turn people away. It is a very hot topic, and I feel like the survey, it kind of jumps right into the middle of it. I understand this, but it jumps right into the middle of it, and my concern is if we send this out to everybody in the town, people aren't gonna have an appreciation or a full understanding of the issue. So a couple things, maybe they can, it's good we have like the definition of affordable housing up front. It's kind of quick and like, okay, I understand it because we've talked about it a lot in these meetings, but I don't think a lot of people, I don't think are gonna understand this. And they may not appreciate or understand, the density, the transit-oriented district, the apartments above businesses, which was the big topic over in Old Lyme. I don't know, that's just, I'm just throwing that out there. It feels like there's not enough context for the town.
Just to kind of go back, and I wasn't at your last meeting when you discussed this.
Mhm.
So just to kind of, we went through and we did a housing survey for our previous affordable housing plan, and we asked a number of very generic questions. This survey, remember we talked about, do you live or work in Old Saybrook? You have those kind of on every survey. But part of this was, at one point, we talked about having a PowerPoint presentation and going through this, and then we talked about the survey and having, as someone takes the survey, having some facts. So I'm just gonna try to find. And I think some of it too is maybe removing some of the affordable out of it. Because we're looking at housing. So when some of the questions here, I'm just gonna kind of, let me find something. Would go through and have some kind of photographs with them. So we talked about having public outreach, and then we kind of said, okay, we could do outreach, but we thought everybody's a little bit burnt out. We've had a lot of outreach.
Right.
And then we said, well, how many people are actually gonna come? So for example, And I think this was what Sarah was trying to show for questions, 17 and 18, going back. We would make this a little more kind of interactive, but also informative. So, for which of the following option would be best in the Mariners Way, Boston Post Road East area? So you could kind of show a townhouse, you would show different types of houses that people could pick the A, B, C, or D. Maybe they don't know if it's a townhouse or a duplex or what it is. But the other thought was, there was a question. So if your question was, how much do you think an affordable unit is? Or the income, this is based on, it would then have a fact afterwards. So if you say, what do you think, the income of Old Saybrook is? So you would go through and you would put your number in, and then you'd put your answer, and if it's right or wrong, it would say, the current median income for Old Saybrook is 148,000 and so forth. So it would kind of lead and build upon itself. Because the thought was, we have all these surveys, the other thing is like, other, please specify, if people don't understand, they kind of put whatever it is, and we learned that from our last survey. So the questions would kind of build upon each other and say, do you feel like you're struggling for basic housing needs? If yes, these are kind of basic things that people can answer, but when it gets into, do you receive any of the following from social services?
Mhm.
It would then say, do you realize, 1 out of every 4 children is on Husky and build on it. So it's more educational. So I think you kind of put that back into it. It's getting the questions together, getting the facts, putting these pictures in to go from there. And I understand, I think some of this too, where Sarah did put in a little bit about affordable housing, but I think we need to kind of go more towards housing in general.
In general,
What do you think an affordable housing unit is? And like when Maria DeMarco, who was here, there's many people who think it's people who have housing vouchers
Right.
that come in. So that I think we need to build upon and maybe the framework in the beginning. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, I didn't realize you were gonna put all that other information.
No, that's here. What
So
we-
this is still very early.
So we're trying to get the questions together.
Yeah.
And then put the photographs and those responses in, but you really can't, with the survey program, you really can't put that all in there.
so the survey would be broken up into more, you have your generic questions. Then you go into types of housing. Areas, who should be responsible because the way it comes across now, because I remember what you're saying, and I thought about that, but it's hard to envision that when you're looking at this.
Right.
And
So that this is kind of the framework,
Yeah.
and I think too, we can remove affordable and then like what, so question 11, what role do you think the town should play in expanding affordable housing? Maybe it's providing additional housing options.
well,
And I think that's where you're going, Doug, because there's some people just don't understand what affordable housing is, but housing options. So you would go through, and my understanding of the way this is gonna work is, have an ADU, put like a picture and say, mother-in-law.
right,
Something where people will learn that we know this.
I guess. Okay, so then we really wouldn't lead off with definition of affordable housing.
Well, I think we should.
No, I don't think we should.
And maybe capitalize it in italics, the defined version, the.
Well,
No, I think this first.
I
this-
think
this
that's
is where I'm
more for
coming-
us.
I understand that, but it's hard to envision because it's not laid out like you're talking.
Okay,
And I think this first preamble should be, what are we talking about? Housing in general?
Mhm.
Because right now, it makes it feel like it's just about affordable housing. And I know it's not.
And I also think we need to be careful when we talk about affordable housing because, and I'm gonna address the elephant in the room. Living in an all-white community,
Mhm.
what's the first thing that they think of?
Okay.
So I think if you can kind of eliminate affordable housing too off, take it out of some places, because that's what the first thing that they're gonna think of. They're gonna think of people are coming in who live in section 8.
Right.
And the crime's gonna go up,
Yeah.
and so, and that's not the case.
Mhm.
The thing is, mother-in-law apartment. We've got young people who are graduating from college or they just got their first job and they're looking for a place to live. They can't afford anything here. So I think we need to be kind of careful how we phrase it, because what happens is people are gonna get the wrong idea.
No, I agree, and I think she put the definition up here just for our reference.
Yeah. And all I'm saying is just try to take out affordable housing, don't have it so many places.
Yeah.
Call it housing options.
Housing options, I think, will go a long
So
way.
what I'd like to do, or I think we should do, when we redo our legally required affordable housing plan, is call it our housing plan,
Mhm.
and then in the preamble say this is to satisfy our housing needs as well as meet the
Right.
required statute for affordable housing.
Mhm.
Um,
Because, and I don't mean to focus just on this big section up front. But like came highlighted, deed restricted or code restricted units. I mean, we have to define that. So people can understand it. And then, of course, I think Bob asked it. The incomes listed here, they're paying this for rent. Well, what is that? I mean, I looked it up. It's a family of 3.
right,
So when we do that, we might want to pull the chart that Maria gave us and plug it in there.
and I think we may even have new numbers by the
Probably by
time that
then,
we do
yes.
this, because those were the 2023 numbers where, our jaws all dropped and said, how much is the median income? And you look at an 80% unit. And I think maybe we can make these more into the question, when you think of affordable housing, how much do you think an affordable unit in Old
Correct.
Saybrook for a 2-family or, 2 and 3 income household,
Right.
3-member family
Right.
is? And when you start putting these numbers in, you put 600, 700, or whatever, I'm talking about rents, but you're talking 50,000, 40,000, 30, when they see people who don't understand it see 150,000, or it's 148,000 as of 2,000, and so I can work on that.
Okay.
And we can still do the public outreach too, I think everybody's burnt out.
Well, I'm not, yeah. We keep going into public referendums and public meetings and all this. It's gonna get lost. I think if this can be laid out similar to the way the survey is gonna be laid out.
Okay.
I think it might make it easier to follow. Because like questions 1 through 8 basically are just basic demographic type questions that you ask on every survey, And then who is responsible for solving the issue? We go into the town. And then I think we have to mention when we talk about ADUs, that's not just for family. If, let's say I owned a business and I had space to have an ADU, I could rent an apartment on my land to someone who worked for me to keep that person in town.
Well, I think what we're grappling with here is that have become aware that it's very complicated and technical, and we're using those terms, and to have a survey that has any legitimate outcome. I mean, you're asking people who have no such background, so then you're in the process of having to write long paragraphs to explain it. So then they're never gonna get through all the technical stuff. How meaningful is the result
Well,
gonna be? So,
And I think some of it, I'm just gonna say, question 11, is what role do you think the town should play in expanding affordable housing? I think it should say, what role do you think the town should play in expanding housing opportunities for Old Saybrook? And I think it's just tweaking it a little bit.
Yes.
This version Sarah worked on, and I didn't really get a chance to look at it, I'll be honest.
Okay.
But I think a lot of it would be, which are the more, most urgent issues about housing? Number of affordable apartments, price mandating, I mean, maybe it's, number of available units. We twist it.
Yes, because like C, that's already mandated by the state.
Right.
We're not gonna make it any more restrictive, because then you're not gonna get development.
I mean, I think the ones, housing trends, absentee, I think people can put
Yeah.
those in. I'm just kind of running through these. Which of the following housing options would you like to see? Large apartment, new single family, multifamily, convert, establish? I think that's something we really need the input on as a housing task force. Because we need that public buy-in, if it's,
Right.
um,
And this is picky, but I think was mentioned by, I think maybe Bob, Doug, and Paula, it's established buildings / residences. Not residents. We're not converting residents to multifamily people. And what did you call them, Doug? Duplex and triplex?
All the 3 deckers.
The 3 deckers, yeah.
you get a quadruplex, you get, I mean, we can really get into it.
The 3 deckers everywhere. Yeah, I put my comments, like which of the following options would be best for young families? Well, I don't know, for me, it would be a single family house, but I don't feel like I'm in any position to tell young families what.
But I think when you go back to question 2 and they analyze it, you're gonna say the best option for young families. So you and I are gonna say
They're gonna
an apartment,
weed us
and then we're
out.
gonna look through and say, oh, well. It looks like everybody over 40 said the best option for young families apartments, but the young families. Will say 25 to 34 all said single family.
Right.
Yeah, all right, so if I'm a senior, which I am, which of the following options would be best for seniors? Multi-level units, 1 large lot, separate interior units, individual units on a lot, all of the above, it's up to the individual.
Right.
Well,
I don't know,
I suggest changing the wording to, in your opinion, which would you think that seniors would prefer? Or something, I forget,
Well,
the emphasis
What would be
was
your
not that
preference or?
you were being a know-it-all,
Right,
that
right.
you were dictating.
maybe there's a way. To say, if you answered, a young family, so we're gonna say they're 35 and younger.
So then ask them, what type of housing are they
Exactly,
looking
and go
for?
and ask them,
Correct.
not ask
Everyone.
what we're going through. So we cater these to, if you're a young professional, that could be, I mean.
Yeah, I wonder if,
And I made the comment, I didn't like the word professional, what if they're a young retail clerk? Is that a professional or a firefighter?
Well, I guess the question is too, why,
Yeah, what is young and why professional, why not? What
I
would
think
be
we
for
put-
young workers. But I sent that my written.
so which option would be best for, and I mean, I agree with professionals, maybe we say, single individuals and couples.
why are we limiting to just, I guess, like why don't we just? I don't know, I mean, I guess we're saying seniors, I know we're saying young families, I guess there's people between, it just seems like we're trying to get super specific. When we could just ask them like, what kind of housing are you looking for?
Correct.
Right.
So when they answer their age group,
Yeah,
then they go into a question about what type of housing are you looking
Yeah.
for?
What do you
Okay.
just make it
And
broader.
are you still looking?
Right.
And what would you like to be if you're looking?
Yeah, like, what would interest you, like
Right.
what's your,
And then we can get rid of those multi-level questions.
right?
Yeah.
I think, just think they're kind of like oddly just too specific.
Right.
Alright, so let's just.
Because you could get seniors that are looking for single family
Yeah.
housing.
I'm not a young family and I don't think I'm in the senior category, but I would want housing right now. I would move tomorrow if I had housing options, but
Right.
no, I think we,
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, a senior doesn't want multi-level floors, multi-level living.
I mean, I think those, some of them I think are kind of no brainers. But it's more,
It comes into that consideration, because, we don't require an elevator until you get 4 floors. So everyone builds 3 floors. And seniors need elevators. Hell, I need an elevator.
and then I definitely think we gotta work on these areas
Yes,
of town that there's.
Mhm.
Sarah and I went through and I was just some. What if you live north of Ingham Hill or north of Route 1, what,
Yeah.
that's a little bit, that's gotta get, main reason you would move.
So this is gonna go out to residents in the town now, so for the most part. all
It's
the
gonna go
people-
out to residents, it's gonna go out to,
So,
it could be someone who works here.
oh, okay, good.
So the thing is, and that's why it says, do you live or work in Old Saybrook? So this could go to the store clerk who drives here every day from New Haven to manage, a small retail store.
Mhm.
And then the neighborhoods, that's kind of tough. I mean, I'm thinking, do you live in a beach community? Do you live north of Route 1? We're gonna forget somebody.
I think it would be better if you did it that way, geographical as opposed to the name of the neighborhood. Because, people call my neighborhood 2 different neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It's either Cornfield Park or Forest Glen.
And if you live in a condo in between two.
So did I.
So if we did beach community, north of Route 1, south of Route 1,
Mhm. And Dennis probably doesn't even know his area is called
Main
Sandstone.
Street.
we did not do that. There's much debate about the access to cornfield.
There is none. You have it.
So, or I mean, do we say,
They used to have a little medallion. Yeah.
all right, so if we narrowed it down to north of 95. Mariners Way, which is Route 1. East.
Yeah.
Or maybe we just say Route 1 East, Ferry Road. Ferry Essex Road. This is where it kind of goes through because you say Mariners Way, it doesn't include Ferry Point, it doesn't include many neighborhoods.
Mariners Way is.
I was gonna say, I have to
I
ask my
guess
parents if
what-
they know where Mariners Way is.
Pardon?
I'd have to ask my parents if they know where Mariners Way is.
They'll probably say no. All right, so. I mean, north of 95, I guess what's most important, is it north of 95? Within a mile of transit?
There you go. That works.
That's a big area,
South of Route 1. I like Ferry Point and Essex Road. Because takes care of Ferry Point and
Ferry.
Ayers Point, Otter Cove.
Essex Road. Then you've got Middlesex Turnpike,
Right.
you've got, and this is,
Like Connolly, well, I guess it'd be north of 95 though, so, right?
Yeah,
So what do we do with that information? That's what I'm struggling with.
well, this is,
If somebody lives north of 95 and they put their answers down. Oh, just struggling with that.
so maybe we
It's,
just say,
it's a lot of, like, when I blew through the questions, like, as a responder, I was kind of asking myself, all right, what am I telling the town? And I didn't really know, because it feels like it, and I know it's still work in progress, so I don't mean to be critical, but it just
No, I mean, I
feels like
know
it jumps
this
all
is-
over, like, what does it really matter? I guess I live in Cornfield Point, does that really matter?
Yeah, would you move someplace tomorrow, right? Someplace different, I mean,
Yeah,
I guess the question is.
I mean, is it the density question? Do I want more density in my neighborhood, or? I don't know, so I think we just need to.
Well, I mean, maybe we don't need it, but it kind of gives you an idea. And I mean, the other thing is, where do you live? I mean, out of town could be one as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So what would be,
So maybe that's the question. Do you live in town, out of town? Are you a commuter? Do you?
Well, that's question number one.
Oh, sorry. All right. That was that one.
so does that cover it? I mean, I guess what will we get out of it? Will we find that more people north of Route 1 don't want apartment buildings and find that people, I mean, that's kind of the interesting part of this too. If you're south of Route 1, they're gonna push for more density. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. While we're doing the survey, that's your chance to grab that data, so.
So if we said, I mean, obviously all hypothetical, we wanna put 5-story apartment buildings and write regulations for that north of Route 1. I don't think we would get the buy-in for it. It doesn't really fit the planning principle, but I think we'd also hear from, if that was what we wanted to do or the commission wanted, we would hear back like, no way. So we kind of say, we did the survey and 90% of the people who responded north of Route 1 said they didn't want this, this, and this.
Mhm.
So we have
That
some
makes sense.
support and buy-in. I'm trying to figure out the best way to,
But by default, wouldn't most of the opportunities be north of 95? I mean, wouldn't most of like a higher density place, A, it's a little more denser down here, just we're more congested, and then B, to find a site specific that would accommodate multiple densities, the higher densities. It probably wouldn't be here, would it? It would likely be north of 95? I'm asking, I mean. I know it's so site specific, right? Like that's the whole point, right? I think it.
well, I mean, it's tricky. We have a lot of large tracts of land and you look at the zoning map. And you look at the lots, it's, wow, that's really, there's 40 acres, but then you really look into the 40 acres and you find there's steep slopes.
Right.
The utility line runs through it, and then all of a sudden that 40 acres really becomes 2 acres.
Which kind of
Once-
makes the question irrelevant, right? Because it doesn't matter if you're north or south, it always just comes down to a site specific.
And are you gonna build a 4-story apartment building on a well?
Right, I mean, I guess to me, it just
That's
kind
what's
of
out there.
comes down to the site itself, not whether you're open to it or not, it's just whether the site can accommodate it.
I think the thought was to see what kind of buy-in we would get for. Someone would answer the question, we could say, okay, everyone south of Route 1 said we don't want more density. Or just so if the commission writes a regulation,
You're gauging your temperature.
you're kind of
like,
getting, so and I think that's part of this is trying to educate people, get a little bit of buy-in. I think people understand in general, there's been a lot of talk, like you said, it's a hot topic. People understand there's housing needs. They may not understand how 830G or an incentive housing zone works, but it's trying to kind of say, okay, if the planning commission or as the housing task force said, let's go through and
So
put
go ahead.
people living in trailers or what we were talking about before, we're talking about
Containers.
containers. So, if you're gonna make a community of containers and people were gonna live in them, would that be something people would want? Or, tiny houses?
Right.
Mhm.
So when you have questions, do you live or work in Old Saybrook? And they answer it. Can it then bring them to a drop-down list of the neighborhoods?
I think we're gonna exclude somebody, but I think we have to be very general with the neighborhoods.
Okay.
Well, no, I'm
No.
thinking, or maybe some general geographic areas. So like if you say, and I'm gonna go from the west side of town, you've got Trucker Beach. That's a neighborhood, then you go on to Indian Town, but wait a minute, there's Water Haven condominiums in the middle, they're not part of
And then
Trucker Beach.
Then why don't you just say the closest, which are
The Meadow,
closest?
and you got Meadowwood.
Yeah, which are
Before you
closest?
Well, and that's, I think, where we have to,
I get it, but I'm also looking at the MLS system in my mind, and it's a drop-down list
okay,
with all the different neighborhoods, and if you live in a condominium complex, all the names are there to stop people from just making stuff up.
so maybe you just say south of Route 1. In a beach community. South of Route 1 in general.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to work on that. Is that C?
or south of Route 1 in a neighborhood and south of Route 1 in general. Because people might not think of Saybrook Acres as a beach community.
Well, and
And it's south of
that's
Route 1, and
exactly
it's a
where
neighborhood to me.
Yeah.
this
So
is,
what's
this,
Otter Cove?
It's a neighborhood.
Okay, so that would be listed separately.
That would be in the ferry,
That's in the Ferry Point area.
Ferry Point, Essex.
And Essex Road.
Essex Road.
She just said that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she just said that.
so maybe, I mean, it's more of a. I live in the northeast side of town, north of Route 1.
Do we list it by zoning? Instead of like.
People aren't
No
gonna
one knows.
understand.
No one
They're
knows.
They're trying to make it
Well,
very,
no, but my point was like, if you could put in the address and say, find your map, or I don't know.
I mean, people,
I don't know.
you get a survey, you're busy in the middle of the day,
Yeah.
you're like, oh,
I don't know.
Yeah, because this is gonna,
economic development.
this one's gonna
center
take
for
off.
the best
Yeah.
pizza restaurant in town,
Mhm.
or
Okay.
whatever, you
oh
go
yeah,
through.
I thought
And
that.
then you start getting into all the different things, and then you're kind of like, really, I thought this was quick. You know what I mean? And you're halfway into it, people get bored.
And I won't have to vote on something every day. Okay.
So I guess the thing is, we just say north of Route 1, south of Route 1? Or do we phrase the questions a little?
Yeah, that's.
So you're on the right side of the tracks or the wrong side?
One and south.
I just don't want someone to say, oh, I live on Whisper Cove Road and you've forgotten it here, Ford Drive, or I think we need to. Maybe we don't need it, but
Maybe we don't.
I'm just. So I mean, I think when we started this, it was a little bit more about gathering newer information, putting a little education into this, but
Mhm.
also going through and seeing if we get 500 people to respond to this and we get an overwhelming no to quadruplexes, then we say, okay, this isn't what the town wants. So, I mean, we would get that overall, but does it matter if people want quadruplexes in Cornfield Point, or, does it matter, or do we just kind of take the general information and gauge it?
I guess it really kind of comes down to, I know that you ask 10 different people what their opinions are, you're gonna get 10 different answers, right? And I think it's, our goal here is to provide more housing. And like, I think some of this, to me, seems like we're trying to get too specific on what we're allowing to be housing. And like, I guess we come from a different world where it's like, you don't ever want to assume what people are looking for, right? So, I mean, yeah, but maybe we don't want a trailer, or maybe we don't want this, we don't want that, but my point is just that, let's try to cast a wide net first, and then, specify later.
Alright. So what else, do you think that we would want to add to this to get a little bit more into the specifics?
Well, I'll just reiterate what Kathy said. I think that was very good. Like, if we don't focus on affordable housing.
I think that's just for the reference.
Right, but we just talk about how do we expand housing opportunities in Old Saybrook? And then
That
later,
we're
a
gonna do.
subset of those is affordable, great, but take this, do you receive any of the following social services? Do we need that in here?
That was to get an idea of what people are actually experiencing, because I think when Youth and Family Service came here, there was a lot of people who, in this room and in general, kind of said
Or surprised?
Yeah.
that were surprised.
I think it's valuable information
Okay,
because when I tell people I live in Old Saybrook, they instantly go, oh, I could never afford to live in Old Saybrook.
Mhm.
Well, that's not necessarily true. And, you know, we need to stop thinking that.
Mhm.
Because you look at the number of people that line up on Tuesdays at the Congregational Church for the soup kitchen. That blows my mind. To think that in our town, unless that wouldn't make it sound that way, but in this town, people need that assistance, but they do. And we can't lose sight of that. So I do think that's important.
And I think for years, Saybrook has always been known as the very wealthy shoreline town.
Right.
And that's just been going on for years.
Mhm.
And so when you say, oh, I'm from Saybrook, just like you said right away, oh, you're wealthy.
Mhm.
No, I'm on the other side of the tracks, sweetie, you know?
Yeah, but,
And-
I mean, when you look
and-
at what I paid for my house in 2019,
Yeah,
compared to what I could sell it for today,
yeah.
it's
But then you know
ridiculous.
where to go.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Well, that's
it's
the problem,
really, how do you, gauge it, okay? You've been in Old Saybrook for years and years, you know, kind of going back to some of Sue's conversation, you know, the couple who has their house, they can't afford their prescriptions.
Right.
They're on a reverse mortgage. They're not gonna tell their neighbors, hey, I can't afford my prescriptions anymore, and going through, I think there's a lot more people who are receiving, I think it's good.
There's more
it's-
people like that than people realize.
Yes. And I think that's an important
I do too.
thing to find out through this, is how many people, you know, really, you know, are answering these, you know, are we gonna get, are the people responding to this?
Are they the ones that aren't using any of these services?
Exactly.
You know, because if that's
So
what
then-
they're doing, the information's skewed. Because we're not addressing a core segment of the population.
We're not getting to the people, it's the folks who are not having
Correct.
issues, so I think it,
Do you wanna have an income section in here anywhere? Do you wanna have, it to your point about like, okay, what's affordable look like? And I'm making the numbers up, okay, you make $100,000, well, do you know that you could qualify for affordable housing at this level or not, or just, you know, and again, it's anonymous, right? So. Do you wanna put an income question in there or no?
this is your survey, I don't think it's a
I'm
bad
just
idea.
I think it's warranted. I do. And I
Yeah.
think Jay's making an excellent point, because when you look at the chart of affordable, you know, for people at 80%, that's $120,000 a year.
Yeah.
You know, and then their rent's only gonna be $1,800 a month. If they know they qualify.
Right. I think half of it is they just don't even know.
Right. Now, the problem is that they qualify, there's so few units, but that's a different
That's a
story.
separate story.
That's a different story, yeah.
I think I'm getting a better vibe on where you're going with this, because the first meeting, like I said, I apologize, I wasn't here. But it kind of threw me off, and then everything got plugged into this one, so now. I mean, what I'm hearing is we can narrow down some of these that are too specific. Remove the affordable portion of it, it seems to be too focused on affordable,
Mhm.
because our plan's gonna be a housing plan,
Right.
which would include affordable housing. Some of the things too, like, you know, which of the following is a barrier, I think we should use positive words, not,
Yes.
things like that. All right.
The housing trends in town, number 12.
Mhm.
I have some interest in the answers there, but I can't see anyone really knowing the answers. You know, increase in absentee landlords, mortgage foreclosures, decreasing home values, increasing housing prices, increase in number of second home buyers.
And I mean, it should be, what do you think?
I don't think any of those are a housing trend.
Increasing house prices, probably.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's fair. And possibly E, an increase in the number of second home buyers, but you don't really know that.
Mhm.
Well, that's another, I mean, do you say, what do you think? You know what I mean? is the current housing trend in town? I mean, I can almost overwhelmingly say people are gonna say increase in second homes and high values. I mean,
Right.
that's,
Right,
but I think you're right, identify. It's tweaking the words, some of them
yes,
kind of imply that there's too much that you and I actually know there's more foreclosures in town when we're not bankers and,
yeah,
or in the real estate market. Not, I mean, not all of us,
we're
but
just not seeing it,
we're not seeing.
I don't think the average person here in town really knows.
no,
You know, you could be living next door to somebody and there's gonna be a foreclosure
you never know.
and you wouldn't know.
Okay, so we're gonna make these each, I'll kind of, all right, so I'll take these, make them,
Well, I sent in
and I'll go through it.
copious comments, none of which I brought with me. So,
No, and that's fine, I'll go through them, so this
Yeah.
week I kind of got derailed a little bit the past week or so on our
yeah.
meeting before this one.
Yeah,
Kind of focusing on that in another special meeting situation, but, all right. Anything you think we're missing?
I had asked, about that process, the fee in lieu. So kind of what I'm thinking about is processes, outside of affordable housing that communities can use to generate resources to make housing more affordable. So for instance, some communities, put a fee on large transactions, funnel that money back into a fund and then use that fund to increase access, to housing, things like that.
Do you think someone for this survey is gonna?
Well, so, you can see some people saying, well, no, I don't want any extra real estate transaction fees. And other people saying, no, I think the town, should collect
So-
funds to do that. I guess I could see people having different opinions on that.
So that kind of
makes
goes,
housing more unaffordable.
But it's the other way around, so you would put a fee on high dollar volume transactions, the biggest transactions, and use that to subsidize the more modest transactions to make modest housing available.
If people I disagree, then it puts all the burden on real estate, which compounds the problem. If society as a whole decides it's something they want to support, then everybody should support it through their taxes. In other words, that would be the way
Yeah.
to legislate that money.
but I think what Dennis is saying, to put word something in there. To say, would you be supportive of, some type of an additional tax or transaction fee?
So like
To
Martha's
help-
Vineyard is a good example. They have a system that does this, that they collect fees on real estate transactions that allows them, and they have, of course, have an even more unique situation than us being an island.
One of the questions talk about, would you be supportive, like the town allocating money?
Yeah.
Maybe it's something, would you be supportive of which of the following to help create more diversity in housing and housing options?
Mhm.
A, additional funding in the town budget. B, a transaction tax,
Yeah,
come up with something like that and then merge it.
yeah, something, yeah, whatever I don't know what the actual appropriate, systems are, but kind of.
I can just put it more in layman's terms,
yeah.
would you be willing, to pay $1 extra a year on your tax bill to support
Right.
a different housing option? Or do you think it should be a transaction fee when your house sells? And just, I'll word something, and then I'll put that'll go through, would you support? I think a lot of these can get consolidated. I think I agree. So, all right, what else?
that's all I have.
And I have your comments too. I'm not gonna not look at your comments, but I think overall in general, I've got a feel of. I'm thinking, hi Chuck. So Chuck is
Oh,
online.
okay, sorry,
Sorry.
Chuck.
Our computer, or I'm sorry, our TV screen's out. So I can see you and Karen can see you, but everyone else. So do you have any comments?
Just one. You hear me?
Okay? Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I came in just a few minutes late. The first word I heard was context. Is there consideration for having a sort of a preamble that sets up why it is this task force has been doing what it's been doing? And what I mean by that is there are statutory legal requirements for municipalities to do things like a plan of development, and there may be many others. I have to defer to you as a group because you're operating a multi-part municipality. I come from essentially a residential district. We have nowhere to move, nowhere to go where we are in the borough of Fenwick. You folks have all the little parts and pieces that you've got to manage or think about. But this context idea up in front of however this survey may be constructed, I think would help people understand why it is they're even getting a questionnaire or a survey. Is anyone following what I'm getting at? Is what's the
Yes.
Yes,
what's the underlying reason? You've talked about people not really understanding affordable housing, that term. And I commend you for perhaps diverting that over into a housing plan. But I would think some people would become more engaged if they understood this is a statutory requirement. You might even say, what happens if you don't do anything at all? My understanding was that if you don't do anything at all, you are no longer eligible to apply for discretionary funding from the state. If I'm wrong about that, absolutely correct me. But that's an important factor for people to put their minds to it and then work on the questionnaire, actually dedicate some time to think about it. That's
I think I think you have a good point, and I think we're doing this survey for a number of reasons, not just because we're required to have an affordable housing plan, but I think we're also doing it to see how to tackle the task force here is looking at all types of housing opportunities and to get a feel for that. So maybe it's more, the housing task force started in the affordable housing plan. However, we're not just looking at affordable housing. We realize, that there's a need for more diversity in housing. We have people who grew up here who can't live here. We have people who are aging here who can't afford to stay here and do something maybe, very general and not technical. That the average reader say, okay, this is why I'm taking this. It's to find out, if I can afford to, well, thank you. Now everybody can see if we can afford to, move here, or will my kids be able to stay here and so we can do that. That's
Yeah.
fine.
but I like where you were going, John. That makes
Yeah, I
sense.
do too. Okay,
All right,
all right, I'm on it.
okay. Next topic, zoning regulations, questions and answers. Your description of the zoning regs in the layer cake, was it?
Mhm.
That made it all make sense to me. I hate to say it. But
I don't know where I got that.
it finally made sense to me. The only issue I have with the zoning regulations is they are hard to follow. So if I'm looking up stuff for an ADU, it's not specifically stated in the zoning regulations. I guess it's in-law apartment or apartment or,
So we've called them, so the ADU regulations have been in effect in Old Saybrook, I think, since the 70s.
yeah,
And they were called accessory apartments.
that's accessory law.
So now that ADU is the term, we've always had accessory apartment, then we moved on to mixed use accessory apartment,
Right.
then we switched that to mixed use apartment. It's just not going with the trending term.
Yeah,
So at one point, I'm sure they called them mother-in-law apartments.
yeah,
And people come in and they say, hey, I want to build a mother-in-law apartment. Then they're not gonna know what an ADU is or an accessory apartment. All right, so I'm happy my little cake um. Thing helped.
Right. Yes. Anyone have any questions? Or do you want to give an answer to the zoning regs? Chris will come up with the question.
Yeah, so Chris, I just wanted to ask, you know, it was in my email questions, looks like a while ago, but. So section 36 is for planned development districts,
Mhm.
and I understand that would overlay, you know, some zoning area, but. Are there planned development districts
Okay.
now? And
So,
where are
no.
they?
So, 36, the planned development district, actually, began out of one property. So on 91 Sheffield Street, the former,
Marine.
marine
Industrial.
surveys, the current property owner, went to make some zoning changes. I forget, it's been a while, the details. The town was sued at one point, and the PDD came about, so it has never been applied. But that application right now is in front of the Wetlands Commission, so the first planned development district will be coming through the boards and commissions. So
Okay.
it's not, it kind of came about as a proposed text amendment in the midst of a lawsuit.
Okay, so this is a tool that can be used there or other locations, depending on.
Depending,
So,
Okay,
so in Mariner's Way. I mean, that's mostly industrial, correct? Or marine.
there's a little bit of a
Does
hodgepodge.
it, okay, so could this apply in Mariner's Way? Or is that too broad of a question?
Kind of a broad question.
Okay, that's fair.
So I think,
Can I just stick in a question because 91 Sheffield is mentioned a PRD.
no, it's a PDD.
I thought that I saw PRD and I was looking for PRD. It's planned residential development. I think that's what.
So this, maybe I should just run through PRD, PDD, IHC. Would that help?
MOUSC.
Mickey Mouse.
Well, no, actually, it's,
So,
I can.
do we have a PRD?
Yes,
Oh, we do, okay.
I couldn't find it. Where-
so PRD is section 55. There's been a rendition of section 55 in our regulations for many, many years. Kind of how you're saying ADU versus accessory
Okay.
apartment. This was formerly known as our condominium section of the plan of development.
Okay.
So PRD. And like when you review the regs, then you go to this general portion in the PRD here. It says where it can land.
Okay.
So you would have to meet the criteria in A, B, and C. Sometimes this PDD, and I didn't notice while I was going through this, there was one typo in here, but sometimes it should be like, it would be this map and this lot for it to drop. So that's, read it, but it's really their condominiums.
Okay.
We permitted 80 some odd condominiums, North Cove Crossing, North Cove Landing, Four Seasons, and that was like in 2005-ish.
Right,
So this was a kind of a pretty hot regulation at the time, but it does not have an affordable component.
okay,
And
Well,
then we're, so that's why I'm trying to, so like North Cove Crossing, North Cove Landing. Summerwood was probably permitted under this regulation when it was known as the condominium regulation.
well, so would have been, Shelter Cove,
Exactly.
Chatham,
So that's why I'm just trying to
Yeah.
give you a little bit of a
But it's the
idea of,
PRD, but it's the PRD you're speaking of.
this is the PRD.
Okay, thank you.
so. You say there's no affordable component. Is it,
Required.
well, I was gonna say, A, is it required? Or B, is it not allowed?
Well, I
You
mean,
really
if
can't-
someone came in and said, I wanna build 50 condos and put them at 40%. Deed restrict myself and put them at 40% of the median income and
Go for it.
Well, it's
go
like,
for it. I mean, that's nothing we wouldn't.
that's like
say
the
no to
complex
that.
we had a few weeks ago. That's going out off the
Mhm.
Middlesex Turnpike next to Beach
Right.
Compliance. That's 12 units and he's doing 4 affordable.
So each regulation kind of has a different thing when you get into it. And like I said, I'm kind of making it simple so you can begin to grasp it.
Mhm.
And then as you read it and you get into it a little more, you know, there's different things. So like if you come in with a site plan application to build a house, it's something that's, you know, as of right. It's something you meet, you check all the boxes and that, you meet it. A special exception permit is something that trips a public hearing. Pretty much you meet check all the boxes, but it allows the zoning commission a little bit more discretion when they're reviewing. We have a number of regulations that kind of, like the PDD, that also kind of accompany with a legislative change. So what will happen is you have, you know, go back to the Cape, you know, you've got that underlying zoning. And you look at PRD, you know, some can drop, some by saying a legislative change, some are accompanied by a map or a text amendment. So the zoning commission could say, for a legislative change, that's when someone comes in for a map or a text amendment. So Joe applicant comes in and said, hi, I'm gonna put a commercial fried chicken restaurant in the middle of the beach community.
That's that kind.
And the commission, now, but I'm just saying, but I need you to come in and I wanna change the zoning regulation to do that. The zoning commission could say, as well as this commission, that's not what we're really looking for. That's not what we want our community. It's not consistent with our plan. It doesn't make and deny that application. For the most part, you know, legislative changes because it's your community, you know, you make those rules and those regulations. Like, do you want cannabis or not? Do you want XYZ or not? So that can be done through a text or even a map change. Like we had that map change where there were several with that whole hodgepodge
Right.
of zoning a month or so ago.
Right.
It's saying, okay, this, I want to change this from residence A in the middle of the beach community to shopping center business to drop my restaurant.
Mhm.
So, I mean, obviously you look at the plan of development and that you go through and you can't really change. They call it spot zoning. So when you have your underlying, your basic layers of the cake, you know, the A, the AA1, the B. You really don't, you can't just zone one and say, oh, well, Susie makes great chicken. So let's go through and change that so she can open her restaurant and serve the neighborhood.
Mhm.
And like I said, I'm really kind of dumbing this down.
Right.
So that's where they say, when people say it's spot zoning, that's what they're saying. You're kind of just identifying one parcel in the middle of all this residential and you're gonna make it into a restaurant. So spot zoning is not encouraged. It can be, we don't, obviously, it can be illegal depending on how it's done. So you've got that. So you have that kind of that base. And when you have these legislative changes, sometimes these legislative changes go with, and often we don't really even talk about it, like, let's find a section here. You have an application where you can say, and I'm just gonna, we'll pick on you have overlays and you have areas where things can drop. So sometimes what happens is even with IHZ, which was the housing up the street, you have to Saybrook Station, which has an affordable component. if you go through and you look at the second page of the regulations, it shows and it has a description that it dropped on Saybrook Station. So when this was approved, it dropped there and amended the regulations for that parcel to allow these regulations to apply. Does that kind of make sense? There's certain ones, if you go to PRD, which was the condo, you have something similar. And in that case, it says, this section of Residence A, this portion of Saybrook Point known as map this, lot this, same thing. You kind of have that, they come together. PDD it's the same. You have that legislative change and you have a concept plan. So it's, this is what we're thinking of doing. This is our map, amendment, and they kind of fall together. So you drop that onto it and you amend the regulation as well. Sometimes I think with some of we haven't had any in a while, I think we've done them for so long, we kind of really go, yeah, we know what it is, we know that it's gonna fall on that property or in that area of town by the regulation change, but I think we don't really think of it that way all the time, because it's as it falls that you also have that legislative change. Does that help you a little bit? So, and that's why I kind of go to this cake. Is, okay, do you want sprinkles here? Well, maybe not there, my mother-in-law doesn't like them, so we're not gonna put them on that side of the cake, but I think on the other side of the cake.
Right.
And that's where you have that, the two of them together.
So you mentioned the IHZ, Incentive Housing Zone, in section 54. In the specific areas, you mentioned Saybrook Junction and the Seaferry Point. So other areas, so this is for affordable housing, right?
Yes.
Right, because it uses that term right up front, the purpose. And other areas could be added to this section, right?
Yes,
I'm
but
not
this
saying
is a little,
already, but
there's a
could.
story behind this that I think you should be aware of. So when 830G or affordable housing statute, what you're familiar with, you have to have 10% of your housing stock is deed restricted, or you take the regulations and throw them in the garbage and you can put housing wherever there's no public health or safety issue. So some towns, not Old Saybrook, has said, we don't want that. We don't want that housing here. And Old Saybrook has always kind of called it the friendly 830G. We have them all over town. They come out nice. We've always had good luck with them. So it was about 2008 or 2009, the home builders came up with this idea. And they said, we don't want to walk into these towns and you go to the commission and they're all like, you're gonna force us to make our commercial land into housing, and that's not what we want. So they said, they came up with this idea. And it was, we're gonna have this incentive housing zone and the towns can zone where they want it. And that way, when I come in as a housing developer, I know I can go to area X, Y, or Z town, and it's probably gonna be welcomed for this. Well, we were pretty excited about it. And we had to go through a very extensive process where you have to, in an incentive housing zone. Oh, the other incentive was when the town dropped a zone, we approved a zone, we would get a payment. And for each CO issued, we would get a payment. We weren't really into it for the payment. You never know how much, how long, but we said, well, this is kind of a great tool to guide folks. So in the incentive housing zone, you also have to have land that's ineligible as part of this. So there was through, I think it was DECD, and at the time, so you have to, when you write your regulations, there were certain things you couldn't do. So it couldn't be in the flood zone. And it couldn't have wetlands, and it couldn't have, so now all of a sudden we made all these maps. We took certain areas of the town and all these black areas came out, there's wetlands, there's flood. So then we located the areas where it would be eligible. And then we had workshops with the planning and zoning commissions. And we went through and we said, well, gee, we want, and actually this is an old map. Might even have it on there. We want to go through and on Ferry Road, it's not on here. We're gonna zone this whole area here. Incentive housing zone. That's how we zone. That's how we've always zoned. And then we, we have encouraged people to put more housing. And then the boards and commissions say, oh, we have this whole area over here. And over by the train station, we're gonna put this other area here. So we came up with all these zones. And what happened was the first project that came up for incentive housing zone in our big zone on Ferry Road in that area was 45 Ferry Road. It's the one with the whole partnership that's all affordable, and we have the soccer field. So we get it. Well, the way that it worked, our attorney kind of disagreed with the state's spin on it. So they said, well, you can take 45 Ferry Road and you can zone that, as an incentive housing zone. And we started with that, we kind of baby stepped in, and then we did the bigger zone. But anywhere that you zone, you have to do an analysis of how many units you can fit in. So we said, well, we went through and did this whole zone. I'm not gonna knock on doors. We can't knock on doors of people's houses and say, hi, can we do test pits, because our density is based on soils. So they said, well, these giant zones you've done are, you can't do that. That's illegal. It doesn't meet the statute. And maybe there's a different perspective now. So I said, well, what do you mean? When we zone, we want to tell people we want business here, we want housing here. This is what we picked. And they said, well, no, that's not how it works. So the first parcel we had, which was successful, there was a few hiccups, was 45 Ferry Road. We started there. We had the larger map change in 45 Ferry Road with the whole partnership. So we did successfully develop that. However, before you apply, you have to go in, and the town could do it with Hope. And you have this big application, and if you want to see them upstairs, and you go in and you're here. This is my application for the development. So the way that they looked at it is the zone has to be approved. And you have to have the density, which we could never do because we don't know the soil. So it's not like in a sewer town, you go, oh, we have 10 per acre, you eliminate the wetlands, you eliminate all of that. And then you have this proposal that goes to the state, and then the state has X amount of days to review it. And if they don't review it, it doesn't mean it's necessarily approved. So it took some time, but really what it boiled down to, the incentive housing zone, the way the state was looking at it was, we're looking at you, if you can't go through and show the density, then you can only show the parcels you have the density counts on there, and that one development. 45 Ferry Road went through, and then it was Poston, Maine, or now it's Saybrook Station, came in to talk to us, and they said, well, you've done this incentive housing zone, we'd like to apply for it. Well, here's where it gets tricky. An incentive housing zone, like an 830G, is a site plan approval. And a site plan approval, you have 65 days to approve the site plan. Now, in the IHZ, we had to prepare this big binder. So we said, well, how can we get all of this information together to get the approval for the state? But we only have 65 days, and you have another floating 65 days, maximum 130 days for us to prepare the application to be consistent with this great regulation. It's impossible because the applicant's coming in with the application. So unless you really have the applicant who's willing to give the time, and I mean, the applicant was nothing wrong. We had a good experience with the applicants. So now it ended up that the town planner at the time called and said, well, how do we do this? Let's go through and figure this out. So we'll work it out. We'll go through with the zone. So the Saybrook Station Apartments, we went through, we sent the application up. Never got acted on. Saybrook Station Apartments are getting built, never got acted on. So then they said, well, no, we think your zone is illegal. And we're like, well, why is our zone illegal? And there were some things like, we counted as undevelopable area, kind of a buffer around the cemetery, because often people are buried beyond the cemetery line. So we said that would be, well, no, that doesn't. So now we built the development multiple times. So then I started going up to the state and they said, well, what? And maybe a different face, a different perspective. And I said, here's the application. How is it? You know, what do you think? And I said, well, what did you guys do on Ferry Road? You made this big zone. You're not supposed to do that. You don't have the density count. So I said, okay, fine. If we remove the entire zone on Ferry Road to the one parcel, that would make that zone legal according to your terms. And then we could go forward with Saybrook Station. We did that. Then all of these other things came up. The development from the housing community, and I can't tell you how many different groups have gone through that development of an example of IHZ is a great development and an example of IHZ, but it's not recognized by the state as following the incentive housing zone program. And then one person said, well, your zoning regulation is illegal. Our attorney, Mark Brantz, at the time went back and forth. And he's like, no, it is a legal regulation. You don't know how to do zoning. So Mark, of course, goes to this seminar and there's a representative of DOH there saying, you know, Old Saybrook, you know, and their attorney, they're bashing our program. So we all end up going up to see the commissioner and it ended up, they said it was, yeah, we couldn't have done that. So we've stayed away from the incentive housing zone. And the zoning commission, you know, has talked about having another inclusionary zone with an affordable component. So the PDD that we have, that was kind of based just on that 91 Sheffield Street situation, not that it couldn't be used somewhere else, but it wasn't. We spent a lot of time on the IHC. And at one point, and if Bob was here, and we even talked about, let's just take it off the books. We were just so frustrated with it. You know, and finally the zoning commission was like, you know what, we're not gonna go forward with it. It may not, it's been some time, maybe there's been some changed feelings and, you know, maybe I bring up the conversation again. So that's why we don't encourage the incentive housing zone.
Okay.
It's not,
I understand.
well, I'm just saying, so this is, so
It's
it's.
crazy.
It was, and we were so excited, and I think it was Old Saybrook and Wallingford were the two, they called it, the IHZ is the zone and the IHD is the development. But pretty much for Old Saybrook, you have to have the IHD and the IHZ because you need that IHD for the densities to get it approved, and you have to have it before. So we just got in the habit of encouraging the friendly 830G, and we've never been scared of 830G. You know, we've had some interesting, initially, there was some with the property up on North Main Street. You know, we had an application, and if I've told you this, we had an application at the same time for the same property where the housing is now for a Lowe's and affordable housing at the same time. If I've told you this, so the zoning commission for the same property at the same time, the property owner came in and brought two applications for the same property.
Which one do you want?
So the affordable housing units, it was, I think, the first 830G, they were brick walk-up apartments. They were not the nicest looking, I mean, they weren't horrible, but when it's 830G, public health and safety. So They also came in with a Lowe's. And the commission spent a lot of time working on the Lowe's. It would have probably been one of the nicest Lowe's you would have ever seen, but the stumbling block was in the zoning district. It says the sale of lumber and building materials is expressly prohibited. So the commission's like, well, you know, you're selling lumber and building materials. And they said, well, that's not really that, you know, we cater to home improvement, you know, we sell curtains and blinds and you can buy a lamp. And the zoning officer at the time, you know, went out and he was going, we had a Home Depot application. He was like in Lowe's kind of, you know, with the tape trying to figure out how many square feet of lumber and building versus patio furniture and Christmas decoration were inside the Lowe's. And the end result was the zoning commission said, well, you know, you did a nice job on it, looks great, but we don't allow it. And denied the Lowe's, and then they approved the affordable housing with conditions. So we were appealed on the approval of the affordable housing development for having conditions that were too restrictive, pretty much saying we were making the project unaffordable. You know, and some of the things were, we think you should install sidewalks so that people don't, I mean, these are how you write these reports, so people don't walk in the road and die. I remember like some of these. At the time, the commuter lot wasn't there. There was sound studies, there was a number of different things, there was no fencing, so it was, you know, we think you should put up some barriers so that people didn't run into the train tracks and die. You know, this is our public health and safety. So Bob actually was the one who went to court on this. So the end result of that approval was the zoning commission said, well, you know, we'd like a number of these things. However, if we're going to do this, then we want more affordable units. Which wasn't, I don't think, what the developer thought, because a lot of towns say, we don't want all these units, we don't want the development. So the summary of it was we ended up with a affordable housing development. And through the end result of the litigation was we got more affordable housing units than was required by the law. And they never built them. So 830G, the IHZ, now we have, you know, the PDD, which has that component. So the thought would be at some point, you know, to create some other regulations. And go from there. And I'll lead into something else. So, getting a little off topic, but on topic, we had our presentation from MRDA, which is not going to be called either of those. I guess the name is changing, but I'm going to just call it MRDA because I know you remember that from the presentation. There's a new name, which I don't know right now off the top of my head. But the Board of Selectmen, on April 8th, we did it before, but then we didn't have a hearing. So April 8th, the town opted in to MRDA. So that I sent that up to the state there. In the meantime, I told you about that DOH grant that we were interested in looking at the accessory apartments. The DOH has some interest, maybe not on funding the whole thing, but partial potentially. So I'm putting together and getting quotes to work on a proposal. Jacobson would help, and then I have to do it a little quickly. The thought was I talked to the consultant today, WSP, who did Thrive, since they've already just walked the area. They're familiar with the transit. They've actually done a few similar analysis on Main Street. So the proposal would be to take a look at our mixed use apartment regulation, why people are not taking advantage of it. Is it the soils? Is it the parking? To do a little analysis, do an overview, and then maybe pick, I'm not sure what the magic number is, 10 or 20 sites. There's 55 in the B1. that would be potential candidates that would be more eligible than others. And then the second part of that DOH proposal, which I'm kind of calling phase 2, would be to take that information, see what we find, do a little bit of a market analysis and feasibility study, you know, and see why it's not working and what we can do to improve the regs. So I'm working on that. We did move up the ladder with it. It's now coming together with numbers. No one has said yes or no, but I'm putting that proposal together with the consultant. So working off of that, I also think there's some interest because DOH and the MRDA programs, at some point, there's going to be overlap. And I think that is a little bit interesting on how that's going to work. So today I had someone come into the office who is interested in building some housing, a smaller development, doesn't have the number, the location doesn't meet the regulations. But then I said, well, wait a minute, the light bulb went off. And I said, well, this isn't within a half a mile of the train station. Not necessarily where we would think. So I explained all of this and said, and Ed Casella's the attorney representing, and I said, well, would you be interested in working together and going through, not that I'm saying yes or no towards that one, but into creating a regulation within a half a mile of the train station that would have an affordable component, that maybe we'd have a little bit of density, would fit in certain areas, maybe for smaller lots, for some infill development, where I think we could pick up a number of different places where we need the regulation. So, they said, we'll take a stab at it. So I'm hoping in your second meeting in May, or maybe the 19th is zoning, the 21st is your meeting. But the thought would be to have a joint meeting of planning and zoning, just to kind of talk. I mean, the dates right now are kind of, you don't need to get into the, but it could change. It could be June, it could be August, but to kind of have a discussion about this proposal. And then I've been piping in on some of the things I think that would help us move forward with some of the regulations. So we've talked about having another IHZ type of a zone or another tool, and maybe this could be the opportunity to do that. I'm not saying we're favoring the development or not, but if they're gonna write a reg,
Right.
why not write something that can help us move all the other things forward? So that would be huge if it's acceptable. I mean, and the thing is, we could also kind of take that draft text and move it in a different direction, or, you know, cater it to what we're doing, because at some point, I think this commission and the zoning commission is gonna want to put another tool in the toolbox, you know, to try to achieve some of the things you've been talking about and zoning has been talking about.
And that would help us with the housing, so.
Right. And then with the other program, if we can get that grant,
Right.
the survey will get us in line for starting the rewrite in the fall of our housing plan.
So you're saying that you're seeking a district that would be Main Street, 50 properties around Main Street, is that what?
No. So the B1 district,
I thought?
so the B1 district is the central business district in the regulations. There's about 55 properties there. We'd be seeking a
Is that Main Street? No, Route 1?
Main Street B1.
Yeah,
This is
that's what I said,
B1 here.
Main Street, okay,
B1,
yeah,
that's the one we'd be seeking some advice as to why our mixed-use housing regulation is not working with the study and so forth.
so that's not connected to the MRDA.
Well, no, that's not. That's a different
Okay,
thing that I'm exploring for housing.
okay,
We talked about MRDA because housing in this grant,
Okay.
and MRDA, which MRDA does not necessarily, it doesn't include affordable housing, it's all housing. And then we have to go through and work on, or I guess I have to work on putting together what we have to qualify, but I think if this other potential applicant comes forward, is willing to work to meet some of these qualifications. And obviously it's legislative, the zoning commission would have to go through, they're just gonna kind of say, hey, what do you think? It would kind of get us thinking about something within a half a mile of transit on smaller lots that I think we could maybe have some infill development from there. So there's a lot going on. I know it may not necessarily be in front of you for every meeting, but in the background, we're trying to get a lot of these things in place. Hopefully, is that,
In that new, district or whatever it's gonna be called, that would just get approved. Like it would come through here for a favorable recommendation to.
this is just a general discussion with the commissions, a preliminary discussion.
Oh, no, I understand it's preliminary now, but I mean, to get in the zoning regulations, it
Well-
just gets approved by the zoning commission.
Well, no,
It
it
doesn't
would,
go to a town vote.
no, just like any other text amendment or a
Okay.
map change, so any text
We review
amendment.
it, we
or now
advise the zoning.
Zoning gets it, they go through, refer it to you, you say it's inconsistent or consistent with the plan of development. But the initial thing is just kind of saying, this is what we're thinking. It may not be necessarily what everybody here is thinking on the boards on planning and zoning. And it could be, you could say, wow, you could give them feedback that they may not want to come forward. It may not be what you want, but it's something and it's a start. There's some things I think we've been talking about, there's a few things I don't know. So they're working on this for a discussion and some ideas and go from there.
Okay, sounds good.
And even if we have the discussion anyway, and you don't like it, at least we'll have the boards and commissions, and we'll get some feedback, and I think it'll help us to work together to go from there. So do you have any other zoning questions now that we're putting the frosting on the cake?
No, but it was good discussion on these existing districts and why they work and why they don't. So it's good to know that background.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of these districts, I mean, and regulations, some of them, there's a story to many of them. Something happened, something went through, we thought it was a great idea. We talked about a zoning commission, when this was in the past, 5 years or so, we just said, maybe we take it out. And then I'm like, well, why are we gonna take it out? We put so much work into it, it applies to those two properties. People are showing the property at the end of the street, Saybrook Station. I mean, we've had, planners, zoning officers, we've had little mini buses go through saying this is an example of what can work, but it's not recognized. So the thing is, it's one of those, okay, well, I don't think the zoning commission and the planning commission care if it's recognized or not. We put the work into it. It's a good development. It seems to be a successful development.
Yeah.
Why take it out?
Right.
But it's a little misleading because you're reading, oh yeah, we have that there. And then it's like, yeah, we don't.
Not exactly.
Yeah, not exactly.
If I may, just, I can't, I want to confirm my memory about the MRDA. Was that the one where the entity gives Old Saybrook money and in return we have to set a district and they can mandate development within that district? No, that's a different letter.
I don't think any of the people we spoke with, there's any mandates. So MRDA, which is gonna have a new name, and I have to get that to my head, but so the town opts in and says, we're interested in getting more housing within a half a mile of the train station, affordable or not affordable, any type of housing. And then we show we have an area or zoning regulations in place, which I think we do from the B1 housing requirement or apartments that I talked about for that other grant potential, that I think it would be enough to get us to qualify if we can qualify and they accept that, we can always expand. But as a part of the program, there would be technical assistance to the town to improve our regulations and ideas that maybe we could encourage more housing development within that half-mile radius. There's also opportunity, and it's a new program, that it may assist property owners and so forth. But right now, we've opted in. We need to get hopefully the B1 mixed-use apartments approved
Mhm.
as a zone, and then once we have the zone, we can always expand it or change it or create another zone, but that would qualify us for that technical.
So there's no mandated commitment necessary on our part, should this be
No.
agreed.
So I don't think anyone who's come to speak with us is mandating anything. We're opting in,
And we can opt out when we choose.
yes. So none of the speakers, I don't remember anyone saying there's a mandate. These are just options to help us move forward and improve our regulations.
I think one of, again, I apologize, I don't have that back note, but one of those programs, once you're in it, you agreed, you set the zone and then a developer can come in and build something very dense if they get, of course, they have to purchase.
The only thing I could think of would be 830G.
No, it was the.
I don't remember anything.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's a little confusing. There's a lot of things we're
Thank
looking
you,
at.
thank you for that.
I had a lot of
clarification.
people talking to us, so.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
yeah, thank you. That is a concern of mine, so.
But I don't think any of the boards or commissions would want to opt into something
That would lock us in.
that would lock us in. If anything, we would probably opt out of things that would lock us in, that wouldn't allow us to do what we want to do.
Right.
Or kind of cage us in if a law changes, you have to do that.
Anything else with zoning regs, questions and answers?
Chuck, do you have anything?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Any committee or staff reports?
I kind of got into the staff report
Yeah, you did.
through the zoning discussion. We don't have much more unless you have anything for me.
No, nothing for the meeting.
Because the hour is late, I won't talk about 91 Sheffield, that'll be for next time.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Second.
Aye.
I second it.
Good night, Chuck.
Good night, Chuck. Thank you.